Welcome everyone to LTV Studios. This is a night to learn and listen, inquire, and perhaps inspire action. This is the Pine Protection Project. Your attendance here speaks volumes about the level of concern out there regarding the southern pine beetle. You've just seen footage from the air and on the ground, all taken within the last few weeks. It's not pretty out there, but it used to be, and I have hope that it can be again in the future. Here at LTV, we have a pine beetle problem ourselves. We have lost a dozen trees so far and numerous more to be taken down soon. So we've seen it firsthand. I want to take a moment to thank our kind and generous underwriter, the Peter J. Schwartz and Cheryl L. Leventhal Charitable Trust, which cares deeply about this issue, and we would not be here without their support. Before we get into the discussion, I'd like to introduce a couple of special guests in the audience. We have with us Suffolk County Legislator Ann Welker. Say hi to Ann and her team. Is David McMillan here from Sagaponack Village? We are sorry to miss Kathy Burke-Gonzalez from East Hampton Town, who couldn't make it, and Senator Palumbo, State Assemblyman Scivone, and County Executive Ed Romaine, who we know are all very passionate about this issue. I would like to share with you the results of our Pine Beetle Impact Survey. Let's see, here we go. We conducted a survey over the last month. It was not a strictly scientific survey, obviously. That it was more of like a self-selected group responding to our emails and media placements. But we have rated the top 5 concerns as expressed by the survey respondents: wildfire risks, loss of habitat for wildlife, impact potentially on the central pine barrens and aquifer, safety risks in general posed by fallen trees, and the aesthetics of the landscape. In blue, on the next slide, you can see a breakdown. The blue segment is those who rated wildfire as their top concern. The red is the habitat loss. Orange is the central pine barrens and aquifer. Green is safety risks. And red is represented in, like reverse that. The red is the habitat loss, and the orange is landscape aesthetics. Those who responded to the survey told us they found pine beetles at home or at their place of business. 40% of respondents found them at home, 7% at their business. 36% did not find any southern pine beetles, fortunately. And another 17% were uncertain. They may have had trouble identifying a beetle or not certain if they have them in some other way. And of those who reported the southern pine beetle at home or their workplace, 75% were able to hire a company to remove the dead trees. 24% did not have the financial ability to hire someone, so the trees remain. And one person removed them on their own. Brave person. So that was just our survey results in a nutshell. We held the survey open for a couple extra days to cast a wide net. But I would like now to introduce our experts and panelists, some of whom have driven a very long time to arrive today. First, we have East Hampton Town Councilman David Lease. Thank you, David. Tom Rule is Vice President of Trails Maintenance for the East Hampton Trails Preservation Society. He's seen these conditions on the ground up close, as so many of us have. We have Polly Wigand, who is the Northeast Fire Projects Manager of the Forest Stewards Guild and a leader in the North Atlantic Fire Science Exchange. Welcome, Polly. Also from the DEC is John D. Wernett, Supervising Forester of DEC Region 1 right here on Long Island. We have Rob Cole. He is the Southern Pine Beetle Program Manager up in Albany for the state DEC and a forester. And Jason Smith is the Science and Stewardship Manager for the Central Pine Barrens Commission. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I also want to give a special thank you to Jason Nauer, event producer and chief broadcast engineer here, for the footage and video you viewed earlier. So I want to start by asking, what are the conditions you're seeing on the ground in East Hampton town, in Suffolk County, perhaps other parts of the state? I would like to start off with Tom, your work with the Trails Preservation Society. What are you seeing on the ground, Tom?
Trees. No, the beetle has basically gone from town line in East Hampton all the way to Montauk. It's up into Hither Woods, at the beginning of Hither Woods. Napeague is pretty much devastated. Napeague looks in places like a war zone, and Northwest, which was one of the first places hit, and over here. They're everywhere. The town does a lot of the work clearing them out of this area, and it's like whack-a-mole. The trees are standing, they'll be down, you clear the trails, and then like a week later, there's more trees down. But the beetle's been in pretty much everywhere that there's pine trees that, in the town. And I just add that it's now in Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and the Cape. So it hopped, and it's still going for pine trees and pine barrens areas.
David, can you elaborate on what the town might be seeing, especially from a policy point of view?
A lot. The epicenter of southern pine beetle infestation was in the Northwest Woods area around Swamp Road. There's conjoined parkland up there that we have with Suffolk County that was first witnessed by our land stewards. In 2017, the town declared a state of emergency under the supervisor, Larry Cantwell, for about 30 days, in which it allowed the town to allocate funding, but also resources to enter private properties to try to address the southern pine beetle infestation at that time, with assistance and collaboration and coordination with the state DEC, who's been great. From there, the pheromones and the spread far exceeded what the ability of the town of East Hampton had and all other municipal agencies to stop. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is almost complete devastation of our pitch pines within the township of East Hampton. And it's not just East Hampton, it's now regional. Tom just mentioned other areas. It's greater than just Suffolk County now, East Hampton, Suffolk County, Southampton, and more. And that's extremely unfortunate. I'm going to give you my personal note, if you don't mind, for a moment, going off script a little bit. I love going to the beach, and my secret little spot, it's not too secret, but I love going to Napeague. Once I saw getting into areas that really affected me, because it doesn't affect where I live in Springs as much, it became very heartbroken to see how this infestation was affecting the magnitude of the beauty of the ecosystems out here. What that then ended up doing is start driving more policy in which we were trying not just to do suppression treatments on it, trying to take them down, have our land steward go out and work with the DEC and property owners to try to tag trees for their removal. But next thing we have to start looking at is, what do we have to do with fire loads? Recently, working with our partners in government, legislator Ann Welker, County Exec Ed Romaine, specifically former Assemblyman Fred Theo, Tommy John Schiavone, and also Tony Palumbo, and most importantly, Governor Hochul. We've been working a lot with the state right now to try to suppress the larger areas and come up with coordinated fire plans with our fire districts and departments right now to make sure if there was an emergency response, we would be prepared, coordinated, and have access. Access is one of the biggest things that we have to do to be able to do any type of fire with any fire load. The southern pine beetle infestation only increased that. We've had fire load forever out here. We have logging roads out here, double track roads. Logging out here was commodity back in the colonial days on here. Many of our forests are more new growth forests. But what's happened over time is a lot of our trustee roads, town roads, MTA roads, state, county roads, have all they can't be accessed by the fire engineer apparatuses that need to get in there. So our policy has been more driven right now, how do we get access to suppress a fire if it does happen, not just more about the southern pine beetles, but by any means of any type of forest fire that might be out there if it ever did happen. Also, we're looking at town code then too. How can we go and look at widths of gates, widths of cleared area, which is already in our town code, but do we need to change that for the size of new fire apparatus to get in there, turnaround radiuses and such. So there's been a great coordination of fire preparation with the fire departments moving forward with that type of plan. It's consistently evolving, but unfortunately has moved in a faster means over the last couple of years because of the devastation of a beetle on there. I wish I could point to someone and say it was your fault. This is no one's real fault. I'll get into that later. I think it's all of our faults as the human race, but that'll be my closing statements if you don't mind. But the beetles, they don't really care. They're just eating, and they're moving on. But as legislators, what I think we have to do is make sure we secure the safety for the residents by making sure we have access and change the policies through legislation, but also active participation in discussions like this. And I thank you for having me.
Thanks, David. Jason, could you speak to what may be happening in western Suffolk County at all, including the Central Pine Barrens that we care so much about?
Sure. DEC may actually be able to speak a little bit better to that, but yes, there is no doubt that we are seeing the pine beetle present in the Central Pine Barrens. It has hit certain areas. We have some interesting methods to try to combat this beetle, and we've been using them within the Central Pine Barrens. Again, DEC could probably speak a little bit better to some of the suppression or the early suppression efforts that were going on with suppression cutting. But that potential solution has had to change and take a kind of a back step. And that's due to other regulations that have to do with other aspects of our forest, specifically in this case, the northern long-eared bat, who is an endangered bat, cave bat. And so in 2022, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service put out recommended restrictions on tree cutting, hence the problem with suppression cutting to combat the southern pine beetle. So we have a situation where we can only cut trees down at certain times of the year, and the times that we can cut those trees down is not when the beetle is actually active. So the cutting window is from December 1st to the end of February in Suffolk County, so that's a 3-month window. And again, the pine beetle is not going to be active at that time, so it's kind of had to change our philosophy on how we address this species and the impacts that it's having on our system. So from that, we look towards more proactive solutions instead of reactionary, which is suppression cutting. In other words, we see an infestation, we go in and we act, that's a reaction. Here, what we're trying to do is move more towards prescribed fire and get some of the basic properties of our forest more in line with a healthier system, reducing our stem density and other things like that, which can help the forest itself through its own structure. Trees are farther spaced away. The pheromone from the beetle can't communicate to those trees because they're too far away, so it breaks down the beetle's communication. We see, hopefully, a response where that beetle cannot move quite as effectively as it was in a closed tree canopy system where the trees are right next to each other, where they're just literally playing hopscotch and jumping from one tree to another.
That's not a fun game.
When you're a kid, it is. When you're a pine beetle, I'm sure it's a lot of fun. From us witnessing the damage, no, it's something we have to be concerned about and something we need to address.
John and Rob and Polly, would you speak to some of the activities of the pine beetle north of here? Anyone who wants to take that?
Yeah,
Thank
sure,
you.
I can take
Thank
that.
You, Rob.
So we do trap every year using traps and, with pheromones on them through the Hudson Valley and actually up into the Adirondacks. And we have for the past decade now, basically since southern pine beetle was found, on Long Island. We have been trapping beetles in the Hudson Valley. And last 2 years ago, our most northern detection was actually all the way up in Glens Falls. However, even though we trap them, we've never found infested trees or any sort of outbreak like exists here on the island.
I can add that the Forest Service and the states in New England are also actively monitoring for the spread of southern pine beetle as it disperses north. And as previously shared, it has had significant impact on the coastal islands of Massachusetts and moved into Cape Cod, where it's expected to be as impactful and devastating as it has been here due to the prevalence of pitch pine, which is its preferred host species. It has had detections as far north as Maine and New Hampshire as well.
John, do you want to add anything?
No, just to bring up that Ray, it's been here for 11 years plus.
Okay.
And the running theory is that it's blown in from the south. It's a native species down south. But as climate change has occurred, it's moving further north, which is where we're finding it further north from that. But the first instances we found were in Wortham National Wildlife Refuge, Connecticut State Park, so very further west than this. So the theory is it's blown in on these wind currents, so prevailing winds are going west. So this is why East Hampton is one of the last areas to be affected.
Sure. I probably can guess the answer to this question yet. We're not winning the beetle battle yet, are we? Are we? Please tell me.
I'm not sure we should think of it as a battle.
Okay.
I think that's the wrong approach. This is your ecosystem. It's doing natural things quite naturally. This beetle is not having tactical missions amongst itself. It is literally just going where habitat and it can survive. And we'll probably see as we move north that the beetle will start to slow down its progression because we're into colder and colder winters as we move further and further north. It's a southern pine beetle. It's not really keen on winter sports. So as it gets into New England and harsher winters with deeper frost freezes and those types of climates, we should see it start to peter out on its own accord. But here, I don't think we should look at it as a battle. This is a new inhabitant of the Central Pine Barrens. And over time, the system, if we're paying attention and doing our jobs, the system will come into balance. And we'll be able to be a little bit more predictable about which season we're going to see more action and activity from the southern pine beetle, i.e. the winter before the spring was really mild. We'll probably see greater increases in southern pine beetle activity. But if we have a harsher, colder winter, we'll probably see less activity that following season. And we'll get into these cyclical, seasonal surges and pullbacks from the species as the system comes back into balance.
You know, we're not eradicating southern pine beetle from the north. Those warming winters that are driving its dispersal continue to sustain it, along with the abundance of dense pitch pines in our forests that have been largely unmanaged since fire suppression started and has continued to be sustained for the last hundreds of years associated with clear cutting and colonization. So southern pine beetle is now part of our ecosystem, and as Jason illustrated, it is going to continue to move and adapt, and so we're going to continue to see southern pine beetle have impact on those stands that have not been actively thinned to reduce the stand density of those trees. That's why it's going to be so impactful in moving north into the Massachusetts coastal pine barrens region and the inland pine barrens. There are areas that have actively been managing for southern pine beetle by doing preventative thinning, active management, and forest treatments with prescribed fire to thin the understory and to thin the overstory to provide ecosystem resilience to southern pine beetle and other insects and diseases, but also to improve the health of the ecosystem. So in that capacity, we're going to continue to see more impact of southern pine beetle in these otherwise unmanaged and dense stands of pitch pine. And then in some of the areas where there are pitch pine still occurring, we'll hopefully start to see some pitch pine rejuvenation and regeneration. However, that requires the active disturbance of the understory to provide the suitable substrate, the mineral soils, and burning off the duff layer of our ecosystems in order to get that regeneration from pitch pine, if there are pitch pines in close proximity to receive seed or provide seed. So it's something that we are recognizing is going to continue to be impactful to the systems.
Polly,
And- yeah.
your point makes me have a sort of like an off-book question for Tom. Is there prescribed fire activities management going on in the East Hampton trails? Or is it more like on county-owned land or town-owned land that prescribed burns?
Well, Trail Society isn't burning anything, but the state is working on Napeague. They're planning on doing some burning either this coming winter or probably the winter after that. And there was burning done in Suffolk County parks a number of years ago, not for the purpose of stopping the beetles, but for the purpose of recreating grasslands where there are a number of endangered species, and left on the area out at Third House, the Nature Conservancy. They were burning the ground there, but that was designed for an entirely different purpose, which was bringing back grasslands that were being overwhelmed by just growth, for want of a better term.
I can add to Tom if you don't mind also. So I've been taking the point for the town board and collaborating with our partners in government, specifically Chip Gorman, who is the New York State Parks Long Island Region Director on there. He's done a great job on this. There have been no burns out here. The only burn that happened out here recently was on Mashonack Preserve. Again, I think that was more for our grassland burns in that ecosystem recently on there. The state parklands, the town of East Hampton has put a lot of requests into the state. The DEC have had a lot of meetings with the DEC recently, MTA, state DOT, state parks, DEC, all the way up to the governors, where they actually have invested millions of dollars to start to develop what's called burn plans. They've done suppression cuttings, they've done wildfire break cuttings at a cost of nearly $1 million each aspect of it. They're out to contract right now for more fuel ladder cuttings. The next one is for creating burn piles. Burn piles are going to be the precursor to hiring a burn boss, which there are not many, might be a sole source contract, in which a burn boss will develop a burn plan for specifically the state parklands of Napeague area then too, in which they will do prescriptive burns, collaborate with state forest rangers, also with town officials and our local fire districts. So that is moving forward, as Tom said, on that schedule. We haven't seen exactly what those plans are because they're still being developed, but that is one of the next steps. I am not a biologist. I'm a legislator, I'm an advocate. Biologists much smarter than me, I do have to say too. But what I have learned is that these ecosystems are fire dependent, which is something that comes counterintuitive to me, specifically talking about the pitch pine forest. And so with that knowledge there, we hope that it will reduce fire load, but also will increase the strength of its ecosystem by doing natural thinning of it for generations to come.
I would just add, I think really it's important to understand how we got here. Why has southern pine beetle been so impactful? We do have a southern pine beetle issue, but the larger challenge is that we have a forest health issue and in a system that is inherently wildfire dependent or fire dependent. And due to that lack of regular fire frequency that would otherwise thin the forest and maintain the health of the ecosystem and thin those pitch pines to a density that would help disperse the pheromones of the southern pine beetle. That lack of management that has happened, and the lack of fire, and the lack of management to serve as a proxy of the benefits that are provided through disturbance of fire have not occurred. And so when southern pine beetle did arrive through climate change and the warming winters, it arrived to the most suitable habitat that it could have been provided for it to thrive and decimate our larger landscape and lands and urban spaces as it has. And so it's one of our questions was a misconception. So yes, we do have a southern pine beetle issue, but it's really a indicator or a symptom of, disease, of that we have these systems that have not been actively maintained through the natural cycles or through a proxy through management to maintain the systems. And so that's how we got here and why it is so integral moving forward that it's focusing on forest management to reduce the wildfire risk and to reduce the likelihood for not just southern pine beetle, but other diseases that may come in or pests in the future, so that we're not seeing the same impact that southern pine beetle has had in the last 10 to 15 years and will continue to do so.
I would just add that our beech trees are also not doing very well either.
That's Rob's department.
So there were other, not as dramatic as the pine beetle, but there were other species under duress. And just to add small thing, I was on vacation earlier, and I was out in southern Utah, and we're driving through Bryce Canyon on a tour bus, and the guy says, "You see those pyramided piles over there of wood? Well, they're going to burn those for forest management because the forest fires they've had out west." So this is an idea that it's small world out west. In order to reduce the fire load and create healthier forests, they're doing prescribed burns.
It's sort of, it may have seemed counterproductive, but that is one of the solutions then, right? One of the strategies is those prescribed burns, whereas so many people in our sphere here at LTV are worried about wildfires. Can you guys talk a little bit about what a wildfire looks like as opposed to a prescribed burn, and how great is the risk of a wildfire in the sense of like the West Hampton Pines fire, which was not a pine beetle related fire, but talk a little bit about that.
It was brought up, state parks is looking to do prescribed burns. And so, obviously, it's a prescribed burn, so the big difference is the amount of planning that goes into it. So, when you picture a wildfire, you've got flames up in the crown, it's going across the road. We are planning everything to not do that, right? So it was mentioned, burn plans. So it takes about a year to write a burn plan and get it approved to be able to do one of these burns. And the things we're looking at are, a big one is the weather. So wildfire season, here is traditionally, I think, in the spring and maybe the fall. And so we're looking at that and going, what conditions are conducive for wildfires? So we're not going to burn then. That's like off the table, right? So we have this 100-page document that outlines very specifically, it has to be between these temperatures, it has to be between these humidity levels, we have to have so many staff, we have to have so many fire engines, we have to notify, the county, all the towns, we have to, do all this stuff. So there is obviously still a risk there, but I really don't think people, we don't want people to be afraid of prescribed fire because of the level of control. We see these fires like the West Hampton fire that moved very quickly through that area. And maybe, that was dwarf pine, so that's a little bit different. But if we can get into areas like that and burn those fuels ahead of time, in the event of a wildfire, it'll get there, maybe hit a few trees, but we've burned up all that fuel that's helping it spread. And then, the fire departments can get in there and put it out much more easily.
Thank you. Anybody else? Jason?
Just to be clear, we have been burning. It's been going on for several years now. This season, our prescribed burn season just came to a close at the end of last month. This year was a little strange because May, we lost our burn boss specifically because our burn boss needed to be out in Minnesota to deal with those wildfires. So we lost some burn time towards the end of our season, but we burned over 320 acres. Majority of that was grassland, but we did get 15 to 20 or so woodland acres. That was kind of what we lost in May, was more woodland acres to be burned. But it is a system, it is a system that we have in place. We will be burning again next season and the season after that, et cetera. What we're really hoping to do is to start to expand our prescribed burn program. As folks have already mentioned, burn plans are an essential part of that. Some of the other aspects, though, the communities themselves can kind of help leverage, and that's in the development of what's known as a Community Wildfire Protection Plan, a CWPP. The Community Wildfire Protection Plan can help your local towns get the funding that they need to bring in the right equipment, to get their firefighters trained, to identify the fuel risks and areas within that community that are going to be the most susceptible towards a wildfire. And in so doing, we can help bring in those grant funds to help the town address those issues, to get the homeowners help in protecting their own individual properties. So we need to start moving into, we're currently now only burning on state lands. We need to move into Suffolk County lands, and then into town lands, and hopefully maybe even TNC lands.
Can you repeat that? What was it called? The
CWPP is a Community Wildfire Protection Plan.
Okay, remember that, everybody.
And talk to your local policymakers, whether they're elected officials or other folks that have influence. Put the pressure on them a little bit to help develop those plans.
Yeah.
The more plans we get, the safer your community is going to be.
And there's funding federally available, or hopefully there will continue to be federal funding available on an annual basis to apply up to $250,000, which is more than enough money to have a contractor if the town is not interested or agency is not available to have the experience to do that, where you can write a grant to get the funding to hire a contractor. And the Guild, the Forest Stewards Guild, who I work for, we're a national nonprofit organization. I'm the fire projects manager for the Northeast and developing the fire program for the Guild. But that is one of the resources that we help, is to help write the grants or write the grants directly and secure the funding, and then have the expertise and knowledge to build and develop those plans, because we have the wide reach that some of the agencies are not able to. So that is something that I'm happy to speak to the town about, and collaborating with the town of East Hampton and Southampton and the state, both parks and the county, to develop that and be prepared if they're interested to apply for funding for the next funding round.
I think that might have been good news for you, David, to hear. I mean, if it could be considered that, but
Any way to find funding that doesn't affect the taxpayer is always good news, to be able to get good results for our residents. We have been in contact with Senator Schumer's office about funding through the forestry office also then too. But yes, we'll talk more. Thank you.
And I would just add that the community wildfire protection process is a community engagement process. So it's not a government coming in and telling the public what you should or shouldn't be doing. It's an evaluation process where you take all the information related to fire and identify what current planning is in place and where the resources need to be invested in planning related to emergency services, fuel and fire management, infrastructure, maybe codes related, making changes related to codes associated with building materials, or clearing areas of flammable vegetation from within your house location so that you have defensible space when a wildfire occurs. But we take into consideration in that planning process the community values. So there's community forums to gain community input, and all of that information is put into a plan that details all of that information, where it is, and it brings it into a central location. It has all the recommendations, and for everyone to act on, respective of their expertise and knowledge. But then it also opens the window to supportive funding to implement those identified and prioritized practices, whether it's funding through the county or the federal level. And some of those grant funds require having that plan in place in order to qualify to apply.
Who starts that plan? Like, who has to take the initiative? That's what I would love to know.
I do.
Yeah, it's having, one spark plug, I guess, and, the leadership to bring the right agencies and organizations together to identify the boundary of the plan, which is in part due to the fuels and political area, as well as bringing everyone together to identify and kickstart that process.
Correct.
I didn't kick anything.
No, I was going to say something, but they're expensive. The state has put millions of dollars into this. The town has put hundreds of thousands of dollars into suppression treatments on there. We're not going to get it all correct, but to have plans in place, as was stated before, is one of the most important things we can have, and have that access. The town's been working on emergency management plans with our emergency management director from fire departments, working with the county also. There was a meeting with the county just like a couple weeks ago to find out what access points, as I mentioned earlier, what implements, what equipment do we have to use if needed then too. So the next steps are the larger management plans are being discussed, and it's great to have partners like this and to have symposiums like this for us to all learn as policymakers, advocates, residents also, for what our options are to make sure that to not just suppress southern pine beetle, but suppress fear. And there's a lot of fear out there when you look at some of these forests for what can potentially happen as far as forest fires or happen to our ecosystem. So with all those and working together, that's why I appreciate what you're doing here.
And we can be that space for gathering, and here's the first one, right?
Yeah. And I think, if I can add, is just because we have sustained a culture of fire suppression, we have become conditioned in the mindset of preservation. And on the table in the back is a recently published document called Beyond the Illusion of Preservation. And so in a disturbance-dependent ecosystem, we're really conserving our ecosystems, because if preservation is hands-off. And that's what we've been doing as a culture and society with wildfire suppression and lack of management since colonization and regeneration. We've been looking to preserve our lands, and that's really what has gotten us into this situation, is that we don't recognize the ecology of our local ecosystems and what disturbance is critically necessary to maintain that health. And we also, through that fire suppression, we differ through the New Jersey that has that culture of fire. They have a dedicated forest fire service that is able to respond to wildfires and do more wide implementation of prescribed fire, since their organization was established in the 1930s. So they have that culture of fire, the community and the people understand. And so having efforts like this and offering to continue to have educational programs that are founded in the Pine Barrens ecology, and it's not just Pine Barrens, but it's also oaks forests that you have here in East Hampton are also very fire-dependent systems. The whole region and the island, with the exception of the very north shore, Terminal Moraine, are fire-dependent, including the grasslands and some of the wetlands as well. And so it's understanding that foundation of the ecology and then building and implementing that management that is needed in place of wildfire.
Anybody else have anything to add to that particular topic? Then I would love to move on to some of the questions that we sourced through our survey. There are a lot of people who want to know what steps they can take at their properties, at their businesses. Is it about identification, or should they recognize the signs? Like, tell me what someone can do here to play a role in, preventing the spread, mitigating it, and managing it properly? Anybody want to jump in?
I'll start, but I'll probably go down to the DEC on it because a lot of our collaborations with the DEC. I think everyone has to look at their properties, primarily for if their fire did start, how can you assist a fire engineer, hence a fire engine, be able to access your property? Do you have your gates to be appropriate widths on there? Do you have the right amount of clearing around your driveways? Can you get a turnaround point? Do you have fallen dead trees on your property that you can clear out appropriately and remove from your house or from the areas of your house on there? Talk with your tree experts, talk with your landscape experts. They might have ways to do that. Look at the materials that you use on your house also then too. Can those materials be designed in a way that you like to see the vernacular of your house, but at the same time might be a little bit more fire resistant on there? There's ways that we can look at our own properties also. Next on there, I would say keep participating in emergency preparedness. Please continue to go to the town's website, sign up for the Alert Me Nows on there when the town has symposiums such as this or other community efforts on there then too. Those are some of the efforts I would recommend from the town that we've been discussing outwardly.
I would love to hear from some of the DEC fellows here. John or Rob, what would you recommend somebody can do to reduce the impact on their properties? Anything?
From southern pine beetle?
From the southern pine beetle, or is it,
The biggest issue is southern pine beetle. I don't know if we really went to the biology. It's a very, very small insect. It's about the size of a chocolate sprinkle. So what I like to explain to people is, one wolf can't take down a moose, but 10 wolves can. It's the same with a tree. So the tree can fight off a certain number of pine beetle, but it's that mass attack that really makes it happen. So what it comes back to is the density. So if you have like one pitch pine in your front yard, you can take some steps to mitigate that, make sure your tree is healthy, it's not being attacked by lawnmowers or weed whackers. And any kind of that stress invites the beetle in to attack the tree, so make sure it's properly irrigated. There are some bark treatments, but it's not useful if you have 100 trees on your property. It's really only to save one tree per se. But the biggest thing is it's that density that drives the beetle attacks. So if you look out your backyard, if you have, very dense trees, closer than 30 feet within each other is a good rule of thumb, that's more at risk of a beetle outbreak. And clear signs of it is you see, the tree's only defense is to pitch out. So you'll see just sap oozing all throughout the tree. There's another beetle that's called black turpentine beetle, which is a much larger beetle. It's about the size of a grain of rice. That is native. It does attack trees, but it's only like the lower 6 feet. And it's not uncommon to see black turpentine come in and attack a tree, and then southern pine beetle comes in because it's stressed out and attacks the tree as well. But there's a big difference between those two species because black turpentine doesn't necessarily kill the tree. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't aggregate and have these mass attacks like we see in Napier or all these other areas where it's just thousands of dead trees. So that's the biggest thing is knowing which beetle is attacking the tree. But with pine beetle, is it can kill a tree as fast as 1 month. So, all of a sudden you see your tree go from green to red in a month. It's probably a clear indication that it's pine beetle. And that's the biggest one. So if you work with a local arborist or whatever, the sooner you can get out there, the better, essentially.
if you see, it brings a related question to my mind, and then we'll come back, but if you see that changing of the color of your pine needles, is it too late already? Yeah.
It's very possible, but the thing is, it just shows that there's a progression. So we like to say it's kind of like a smokeless wildfire. So it has a point, it starts in one tree and spreads, usually prevailing winds. Not necessarily true all the time, but you'll see, we call it, like fading. So you'll see like dead trees, then browning trees, and then green trees. And so the green trees are probably where the beetle is freshly attacking. If you can get out, of course, it's all resource dependent. If you can get out and try to stop that spread, that's really your best case scenario. But we, when we talk about suppression, we just can't do that anymore in the Pine Barrens. We're dealing with, as you see in Napier, thousands and thousands of dead trees. It's just not an effective means. But on your personal property, it may be worth it to try to slow it down.
And if you do,
Oh, I was going to say, it's also important to note that once the trees are dead,
Right.
the beetles have left. So if you've got a bunch of standing dead trees on your property, you're not at risk of spreading them around elsewhere. I mean, you do have obviously the risk of hazard trees, and we are seeing, these pitch pine coming down in about a year, a little bit more. They don't stand very, like a standing dead oak you could see there for 10 years or whatever, but the pitch pine are coming down quickly. So you won't be doing anything to, save the pine barrens necessarily, dealing with dead trees, but that is an important aspect because they will fall down.
I think a lot of people think that if you've got a tree that's down, you can't touch it because could you disturb a pine beetle
yeah.
infestation? But that is, okay.
The life cycle is roughly about a month.
Yeah. And I would say about this time with the rapid spread and infestation that, it's already dispersed throughout the landscape. So even if you are moving firewood within Suffolk County, you're not really necessarily going to be contributing readily to this spread. Two other important things related to identifying southern pine beetle in your landscape and differentiating when it's southern pine beetle or when it's not, is that the entire crown of the tree will fade all at the same time. So if you see like a branch or a certain section that's fading, that may be due to another insect or just damage to the tree and like a broken branch. So that is when you see that entire fade. And I know Bartlett's in the back, but as a homeowner, as John illustrated, try to get an arborist in to size up the infestation and what the actual causational agent is and whether it's turpentine or southern pine beetle, and get that arborist in sooner than later, because that's going to be the most savings for you related to the safety of the removing the tree. So it's going to cost you less if a business like Bartlett is coming in, and what the skill level and the amount of equipment and tools that they need in order to safely drop that tree, whether they need a bucket or they can just drop the tree. Depending on your landscape, it's going to protect your house because those trees do decline and degrade so quickly and the tops break out of them, so it's protecting your house and your safety. And it's also keeping the sawyer and the arborist safe when they are removing that tree. And then the last component is, if that tree isn't posing a hazard, it provides great wildlife habitat, so there's no need to invest in the cost of removing it. You can leave that tree alone, but making sure that you're identifying that it's actually southern pine beetle is also important, because you don't want to be removing a live tree that may have another insect that it's providing habitat to, and keeping that in your landscape.
Okay. Any other thoughts from other?
I would just tell one of my favorite stories about the pine beetle. I was out surveying trails to see what needed to be cleared, and I had to tie my shoe, and I put my hand up to brace myself to tie my shoe, and the tree fell over. So these trees can be looking fine and dandy, and if they're near something, they're going to come down, and you don't want to be there when they come down. Now, fortunately, I leaned on it and it fell away from me, but it tells you how a tree can look solid and be, dead right there. So, I mean, if they're in the middle of the woods and then nobody's going near them, like you said, you could leave them. But if they're somewhere where they could hit them, you really need to professionally get that tree taken down before something happens.
And to really stay out of those affected stands, whether it's on public lands or private lands, especially in windstorms, because those winds, even at 15 miles an hour, can knock the tops out of the trees. So
We're going to open it up to the questions in just a minute. We had one specific question asked, are there any natural predators to the southern pine beetle? And is that an option for, or if we introduced a predator, would it just be another infestation situation?
We already have the predators.
Oh.
So I already mentioned one, northern long-eared bat, which we lost in all sense and purposes. We had over a population in New York State of over 500,000 northern long-eared bats in 2006. By the time the southern pine beetle came in, 2014 area, we had lost over 98% of that species in New York State. So 500,000 down to, losing 98%, we're down to a handful of thousand left. So that species in and of itself is a predator of southern pine beetle. It actually, the trees that Polly was mentioning that can provide habitat after they're dead, that's the northern long-eared bat is one of the species that's taking advantage of dead trees. It's where they hide their pups. So they're young. But when we look at the whole system, we can go on down the line, and we're primarily going to be in the area of birds here. All right, so woodpeckers, swallows, bluebirds, mockingbirds. The list goes on and on of the number of insectivorous bird species that are out there. So those species are out there. That's also one of the reasons why we can't afford to go to battle with this beetle using insecticides, right? Because all those insectivorous bird species are going to eat the insects that have been contaminated with the insecticide. That insecticide then goes from the beetle or the insect to the bird. As the bird eats more and more insects that have been contaminated by the insecticide, eventually that insecticide will kill the bird. That bird then drops down, fox comes along, picks up the bird, it eats the bird, it also ingests the insecticide that we sprayed. So that's why I say if we think of this as a battle, I can tell you right now we're going to lose. So we need to look at it as a system and understand that this is probably a very unpopular position with this panel, but we were talking about it earlier with the wildfire, Smokey Bear out there telling you only you can prevent forest fires, right? That's kind of how we got into our situation here with not enough fire on the ground. Our forest itself was tree rich, a lot of density, right? Stems, the trees are right next to each other, making it conducive. One of the things that the wildfire does is comes in, and as we said, it thins out the forest, opens up the canopy. Well, guess what? That's exactly what the beetle is doing. It's thinning out our forest, it's opening up our canopy, it's just not doing it in a way that we would prefer to see, because it's having devastating effects. So this is a system, and whether we're standing on the sidelines or not, the system itself is going to keep moving forward. And the forest will find other ways to make sure that it is getting what it needs, whether it's the disturbance, right? That's what fire is. It's a disturbance to the system that promulgates change, rejuvenation. The beetle is doing very, very similar role. It's not as good as fire. It's not as effective as fire. And it comes with all these caveats of hazard trees and potential increased for severe wildfires. So we need to be addressing the system at all times, because otherwise the system is going to fix these things for us. And it may not be in line with what we consider the character of our forest, which is the central pine barrens forest. Again, maybe not everybody on this panel would agree with that statement, but again, I look at it from an ecology perspective, and we have to understand that these things and processes are still happening, and we would prefer to see it happen with fire because it's just the right way. It's the way the system wants it to happen. But if we ignore it, the system is going to move without us.
Rob, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so there's a whole host of other insects that predate on southern pine beetle, including a big one being clarid beetles. And so we brought some researchers from down south, and they come up here, this is 8 or 9 years ago at this point, and they said, oh, you don't have a lot of those, a lot of that insect community. But we've continued trapping, and we're actually seeing an increase in those predator communities. And we've done a little bit of work, if you're familiar with the Albany pine bush, it's like the Long Island pine barrens, except smaller, and it's outside of the city of Albany. And so we did some work there and found that in these managed areas, they actually have higher populations of some of these predator insects. So it kind of speaks, to that whole ecosystem management. If we can, start righting the ship a little bit, these other insects out there.
We're not alone.
Yeah, right?
And if I can just build off on both comments, is that, southern pine beetle has been a silver lining. It's had significant silver lining in resetting succession because of the lack of fire disturbance. That's the process that fire provides the benefit, but it also not only resets succession, but it resets succession from the vegetation all the way through to the soil level, and maintains that very xeric landscape that the pine barren systems are dependent upon. And so without that, we're seeing a trajectory towards either mesification, which is a moister, more maple-dominated, beech-dominated system that you see in mainland New York and New England, where we're losing the pine barrens ecosystems in those early successional habitats that support a diversity of rare and endangered species. So southern pine beetle has helped facilitate that, but it hasn't fully reset succession because the fire has not come through and provided the consuming of that organic matter and maintaining. So that's why southern pine beetle is somewhat beneficial, but it has many other negative impacts, and it's an incomplete disturbance that doesn't fully mimic fire. And related to fire, like fire is the ideal, but if you're in areas where you can't put fire on the ground because of the cost or the liability, it does require significant planning and investments and trained staff, you still can do preventative thinning or active forest management through thinning and mechanical treatments that are going to provide that increased resiliency and improvement in forest health, but maybe not to the point of fire. So still provides significant benefit in the stepwise levels of management that you're able to put on the ground.
I want to open it up to questions. Please raise your hand. Patty. Patty's got the microphone. Right here.
Hi. I lost about 6 pitch pines over the last 2 years, and now I feel like I kind of messed up by having them taken away, and I should have just put them on the top of the hill and created a habitat. But my question is, when I plant new pine trees, what are the ones that are good? I have white pine, I could plant cedar. Like, what are the trees? I have oaks on my property. What are the trees that you recommend? Because I'm not going to go out and hunt down a pitch pine and put that in. So are there trees that you recommend that would be more resistant to the southern pine beetle?
Plant pitch pine. I'm just going to say it, plant pitch pine. That's what you want.
Yeah, we are not recommending
Yeah.
against replanting pitch pine in areas hit by southern pine beetle. I mean, again, I think we've all said it, southern pine beetle is going to be around from here on out, but again, managed properly. So, if you can, plant them with good spacing in your yard, instead of planting 6, plant 2 maybe, something like that. But yeah, we want to keep this, area is known for the pines, and we don't want to lose that, and I don't think we have to, so.
White pine isn't going to last longer, or have a chance of surviving. Pitch pine just has the exact same chance of surviving as the white pine or the cedar.
Well, we have an overabundance of cedar in general in the landscape. It is a native species that responds aggressively to increased carbon in an environment. And it is deer resistant. I would say that it's your preference on what you're looking for. White pine is responding positively as far as coming back in those areas where there's higher levels of organic matter, but it's not shown to be as competitive over time. Pitch pine is really the species that's most adapted to our local environment and is going to be the species that is most resilient over time, both to your environment and to the southern pine beetle. So White pine is also susceptible, and Norway spruce, to southern pine beetle infestations, and will be as impacted as southern pine beetle is in outbreak stage of southern pine beetle. So
I'm really grateful that pitch pines are still okay, because we have a whole bunch of them here for you to take home.
yes.
Any other questions? Carl has a question up in the front.
I'm a journalist, so this is for publication. In medicine, the big focus is dealing with a medical problem by attacking the cause and not just the effect. And a lot of what you're talking about today is trying to deal in various ways to moderate or stop the effect. Al Gore, when he did his film, what was the film from 2006? The Truth. In any case, in this script, I teach environmental journalism at SUNY, and I show the film. And in the film, Gore speaks about the southern beetle moving north. And then recently, he was in Colorado, which has been hit, and he cites, he cites the film. Here we have a national administration which is denying climate change, and agency after agency, including the EPA and others, have written climate change out of their agendas. We have a president who describes climate change as a hoax. Not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, under those circumstances, not getting at the main cause for all this just doesn't seem to be, it's so needed, I would think, to get at the principal point. I mean, here's an administration that withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. It doesn't want to deal with climate change. So just what you folks would think about that.
Yeah, so I think we have talked, all of us up here, a bit more about, direct suppression, taking down trees that have beetles, dealing with hazards. But it's kind of been an undertone, and maybe we haven't come right out and say it, but our goal is actually to deal with the root problem here, and that's that forest management that we're talking about. And I think Polly brought it up with, thinning the stands. So if there's 100 trees, we remove maybe half of them, so there's only 50, and they're far better spaced. And then those are, I can't remember exactly how Jason put it, but, they're just going along, and they're easy trees to eat. They're stressed. They're right next to each other, so they can just move from tree to tree to tree. So, and that's that lack of management, for the past 100 or 200 years or whatever it is. No tree management, and then suppressing all the fire. So you end up with all these very dense stands that are just, southern pine beetle hits them and they go, yes, it's like the 4th of July and Christmas combined. It's perfect, right? So we are actually, and we have some forests, in the Pine Barrens where we've been doing a lot of this forest management. It's called preventative thinning, where we're also doing burning. So if you want to see, what these forests, what we're trying to move them toward, this less susceptible state, you can go to Sarnoff State Forest, just south of Riverhead, and we have 500 acres there that we've started this process of thinning the trees out. We're mowing down underbrush. We've got prescribed fire in there. So we are trying to get to the root of the problem there, as opposed to just trying to deal with the aftermath of trees getting infested and then cutting them down.
I think what you were really asking is global warming, the problem that's driving this. And because if the temperature was dropping, the pine beetle would be heading south. Temperature's coming up, pine beetle's moving north. Anybody who looks at planting charts has known that they're changing the zones that we're in for different vegetation than when I was a kid, which was a while ago. But the point is that global warming is behind the pine beetle coming north. Now, that said, it's unlikely global warming's disappearing in the next couple of years, so we have to deal with what it's doing to us. But the fundamental problem is that, yes, if we were in a cycle where the temperature was dropping, the pine beetle would be heading south.
I will offer that the management treatments that DEC and the Pine Barrens Commission have been advancing on state lands in Flanders. There is a upcoming sponsored workshop that the Joint Fire Science Exchange programs. I represent and help co-lead the North Atlantic Fire Science Exchange. That's our regional coverage area. It's an initiative that is federally funded to help communicate advancing science and use that advancing science to help inform management. And so we put on education programs and workshops. We publish research briefs that are on the back. Some examples are on the table in the back. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for, but we also help host, along with the National Cohesive Strategy, which is a federally funded program, and other partners, the state DEC, Massachusetts Department of Natural Resources, anyone that's able to help us coordinate and host this event. We have an annual Prescribed Fire Science and Research Conference, and it's being held on July 8th, 9th, and 10th online. So it's $75 or pay what you can. And on the 9th, there'll be a field trip that's open to the public that is going to showcase the active forest management that's being implemented by DEC, the Pine Barrens Commission, and Brookhaven National Lab. It'll touch upon some of the southern pine beetle damage, and we'll also do a visit to the wildfire to talk a little bit more about the unique ecology of the globally rare dwarf pine barren system and how that was impacted by the wildfire. And I say impacted, it was a win-win. It's beneficial to that system and very much needed. So if you're interested in that, I can talk to you later about the workshop, but
We
that
have
is
a
an
question from
opportunity.
Jose.
Hey, good evening. Thank you very much. The information that you've provided tonight, while very interesting, scares me a little bit because there isn't anything that seems doable immediately for us. So the idea of the managed forest or controlled burn, I would highly encourage David to add something else onto your shoulders and start that process, because as we see the trees right outside LTV Studios here, we really do need to have something that starts to impact what those trees are doing. I'm in the neighborhood, I have trees on my own property, I have seen them fall, I have seen them stay standing until the wind, as you mentioned, comes over and the top of the tree comes down. So those are things that we want to encourage, and whatever we can do as a community, I'm sure that I know I myself and my neighbors would be more than interested in helping manage that and helping move it forward. The other part, which unfortunately again falls on David, who is a great representative of our town. But David, with all the trees that have been coming down, I know I myself have reached out to the highway department. I've had a couple of trees taken down by the highway department because they were on that stretch of land that they're responsible for. But as I know with my neighbors in the neighborhood, there's a need to organize some kind of process by which we can identify areas and contract someone to come do it. When each one individually tries to contract an arborist or any other tree removal service, it ends up being very expensive. But if we can create a system whereby X number of people come together geographically, X number of people come together, maybe then we can work out a deal, hate to use that word because you know who, a deal that we can actually get a reasonable price. We're all paying for it out of our pockets, and we are feeling that this is something that's beneficial to the town, the village, the hamlet, not just our own personal properties. Because as our properties start to lose the beauty of the trees that we're in, that's also going to impact East Hampton Town, East Hampton Village, the beaches. Amagansett is a disaster right now, going down the Montauk Highway. So anything that we could potentially pull together that would create an organization or a group of organizations to help manage the trees on personal properties, I think would be very beneficial. And maybe it's something that, I'll speak with you, but maybe it's something I can bring up at a town hall meeting, the open session, and see how that might be received. Thank you.
I can add to that as some of the things that David already illustrated, is that there is a whole wealth and suite of practices that homeowners can implement. If you go to Firewise programming online, there is a whole website that's dedicated to identifying different measures that you can advance for and on your property, whether you have a small parcel of land, 1/8 of an acre, up to a larger landowner with forest and developing a forest management plan. The collective advancing, you can advance those practices on your own. I would check with the town before doing any major clearing to make sure that you're in compliance with town code. But those practices are one of the most valuable aspects that the members of the community can implement on your own property. If you happen to live in a housing association, you can work with the housing association to do a train the trainer and implement codes within the housing association to leverage exactly what you're sharing, or work with your community. If you don't have a formal organization, there's a whole program on the Firewise program, and that is also something that the Guild can assist with as far as hosting train the trainer programming, so that you would have a point contact that would know and learn about this program and be able to consult and do homeowner inspections. But I step back in that when we're talking about southern pine beetle and the vegetation and addressing that southern pine beetle risk, you're really stepping back and looking at it is that it's a wildfire fuels risk, because you're either needing to do active management to reduce both your wildfire risk and southern pine beetle. So by implementing those Firewise practices on your property, you're going to be providing the greater benefit and resilience to protecting your property also for southern pine beetle. So it's a wildfire risk, but southern pine beetle is the indicator. So if you have dead standing trees that have been affected by southern pine beetle, you most likely also have an inherent wildfire risk on your property. So implementing those practices in Firewise voluntarily and proactively is going to reduce your wildfire risk, your southern pine beetle exposure, and is also going to improve your resilience when fire is able to be put on the ground related to prescribed fire. So that provides an extra layer of protection for your property when prescribed fire is being implemented.
Thank you, Polly. I'm going to add that to our resource guide, our digital resource guide.
It's called Firewise. It's
Firewise.
a national trademarked program.
Thank you. We're running over, so I just wanted to throw it back to David Lease one more time. Any closing thoughts, David, from the town perspective? What have you learned, or what is standing out to you right now from this discussion?
It is my personal opinion, and I have no doubt that the emergence of the southern pine beetle is due to global warming and the warming of our planet, and the changes that humans have made in our fragile ecosystems by legacy decisions. This is not just being seen in our forests locally, but it's also being seen in our marine life. We're seeing marine life that we haven't seen in years up here that are changing our ecosystems, eating new vegetation in our marine systems, but also different food sources. As the climates get warmer, everything's traveling a little bit more north in our boundaries and within our township, and we have to be reactionary to it. It's time to be proactionary now. Our storms are becoming larger, greater. Sea levels are rising. I hope what we see here is a greater call to action for not just our generation that we sit here, but also our next generation. And if we can't maintain what we have right now, at least let's try to make it less for our kids and their grandkids. My greater fears is that the devastations to our forest are not just only from southern pine beetles, but fairly simply put, it's a harbinger to humans' impact upon our fragile planet. We need to take actions moving forward here. To make lifestyle changes to help address climate change and global warming. We need to look at the state of our forests, not just for southern pine beetles, but determine what type of landscaping we should use? What do we use on site plan designs? What are better suited for all of our ecosystems, which are so various on the East End, and specifically, I'll say my hometown of East Hampton. Lastly, we really just can't take our environment for granted anymore. As we move forward and away from here tonight, we need to assist our forest by planting new trees, these ones here. But even more so, let's take care of the ones that we currently have. I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank everyone here. I want to thank LTV for giving another forum for this discussion. Hopefully by doing this, we're touching more individuals and more information about Mother Earth, and specifically about southern pine beetles and how it might affect you, your fears, and giving you more information to make the appropriate decisions. And the potential responses to make this invasive insect that we are discussing today something that we can get past in a very, very manageable way. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. Can I get a round of applause for our excellent panelists? Thank you so much for coming. If you guys would like to have a tree as well, please feel free to take one. Thank you, folks, for coming. And
In front of Town Hall.
trees, it's tree time. Thank you.